The traditional view, which follows the biblical account, says that David and Solomon ruled a powerful kingdom in the 10th century BC.
Mel Gibson. They translated Solomon's forbidden book. What it reveals is horrifying. New decoding work in 2023 has uncovered sections long hidden, revealing structured instructions tied to King Solomon that don't read like belief, but like controlled systems of knowledge preserved for a purpose. The translation that was never meant to happen. The recent translation of texts attributed to King Solomon, completed using modern tools in 2023, introduced material that differs from traditional expectations. Scholars working across institutions in Jerusalem approach the text expecting symbolic or religious language, consistent with known historical writings. Instead, the translated sections revealed structured passages that resembled instructions rather than narrative. This matters because the shift from symbolic text to procedural language changes how the material is understood within historical context. The translation process combined linguistic reconstruction with AI-assisted pattern analysis, allowing fragmented sections to be aligned with greater accuracy. Earlier attempts throughout the 20th century had produced partial interpretations, but these were limited by incomplete manuscripts and inconsistent decoding methods. The newer approach allowed previously unreadable sequences to be connected into coherent structure. That distinction is important. The text was not expanded, it was clarified, revealing content that had always been present but not fully understood. As sections became clearer, the tone of the material remained consistent. The content described controlled actions, repeated sequences, and defined outcomes. This is where the shift becomes clear. The text did not present ideas or beliefs. It outlined processes. That difference suggests the material was designed for use rather than reflection, changing its classification from philosophical writing to functional instruction. Some early translators reportedly chose not to publish certain portions of the text. Their hesitation was not based on translation difficulty, but on interpretation of content. The structure they identified did not align with traditional religious frameworks associated with King Solomon. Instead, it suggested a system of knowledge that was intentionally restricted. The decision to withhold sections reflects how the material was perceived once fully translated, indicating that the significance lies not only in what was written, but in how it was intended to be used. The book that history tried to bury. The text commonly associated with these translations is linked to works such as the Lesser Key of Solomon, a collection that has circulated in various forms across medieval Europe. These texts were not treated as standard historical documents. Instead, they were classified as restricted material, often labeled as occult or heretical by authorities during the 15th century and later periods. This matters because classification determines preservation. Texts considered acceptable are copied and distributed, while restricted material is fragmented and controlled. Over time, copies of these writings were divided, encoded, and stored across private collections. Manuscripts appeared in isolated locations, including archives in London and other parts of Europe, often incomplete or altered. That distinction is important. The text did not disappear. It was dispersed, reducing the likelihood of full reconstruction. This pattern suggests intentional limitation rather than accidental loss. Religious authorities played a central role in this process. During periods of institutional control, particularly in medieval Europe, texts that did not align with accepted doctrine were suppressed. This is where the shift becomes clear. The material was not rejected due to lack of credibility, but due to its classification as incompatible with established frameworks. Suppression reflects concern over influence, not absence of content. The reputation of these texts developed accordingly. They were not widely studied or publicly discussed, but they remained preserved in restricted environments. The association with King Solomon added historical weight, while the nature of the content limited accessibility. The result is a body of work that exists within historical record but outside standard circulation, maintaining presence without full exposure across time. The king behind the mystery. The historical figure of King Solomon, traditionally dated to around 970 BC, has long been associated with wisdom, wealth, and centralized authority in Jerusalem. Records describe a ruler who governed extensive territories and maintained control over political and economic systems across his kingdom. This matters because his influence was not limited to governance. It extended into areas of knowledge and construction that remain difficult to fully explain through conventional records. Accounts linked to ancient Israel describe projects carried out under his rule, most notably the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. The scale and coordination required for such a structure suggest advanced planning and resource management. That distinction is important. The narrative surrounding these achievements often includes references to knowledge systems that go beyond standard administrative capability, introducing questions about the source of that knowledge. Certain texts associated with King Solomon describe interactions with forces that are not presented as symbolic. Instead, they are structured as controlled systems, involving names, seals, and specific sequences of action. This is where the shift becomes clear. The descriptions move away from storytelling and toward instruction, suggesting that the material was intended for application rather than interpretation. These elements have been preserved in fragmented writings across regions including Jerusalem and surrounding areas. Their consistency across different sources indicates that they were not isolated additions, but part of a broader framework attributed to King Solomon. The combination of governance, construction, and controlled systems of knowledge creates a profile that extends beyond traditional definitions of wisdom, suggesting a structured approach to power that was both practical and restricted. The language that hid the truth. The original texts attributed to King Solomon were written using a combination of Hebrew, Aramaic, and symbolic notation, forming a layered structure that dates back to early manuscripts studied through the 20th century. This matters because the use of multiple linguistic systems within a single text creates complexity that limits direct interpretation. Each layer carries meaning that cannot be understood in isolation, requiring cross-reference between languages and symbols. The structure of these writings does not follow a single narrative style. Instead, passages are arranged in sequences that combine literal wording with symbolic representation. That distinction is important. A sentence may appear descriptive on the surface while functioning as a set of instructions, when interpreted within the correct framework. This dual-layer design suggests intentional encoding rather than accidental complexity. Modern analysis conducted in 2023 introduced AI-assisted translation methods that allowed patterns to be identified across fragmented sections. These patterns revealed repetition in structure, indicating that certain passages were constructed as operational sequences. This is where the shift becomes clear. The text was not simply written to be read, it was structured to be followed, with meaning dependent on correct interpretation of each layer. Earlier scholars working in regions such as Jerusalem and European archives were limited by the tools available at the time. Their interpretations often remained incomplete due to missing connections between fragments. The newer approach did not change the content itself, but clarified its structure. The result shows that the meaning was never lost. It was preserved in a form that required specific methods to access, maintaining its function, while restricting understanding to those able to interpret it correctly. The rituals described in detail. The translated material attributed to King Solomon, reconstructed through analysis in 2023, reveals a structured system built around precise sequences rather than symbolic language. The text outlines step-by-step processes, each stage clearly defined and ordered without deviation. This matters because the format does not resemble traditional religious writing. Instead, it follows a controlled pattern where each action leads directly to a measurable outcome within a defined structure. The instructions repeatedly reference geometric formations, including circles and marked boundaries, placed with exact positioning. These elements are not decorative or symbolic. They are described as necessary components within the process, with placement affecting the result. That distinction is important. The text treats space as controlled and functional, shifting the purpose from expression to execution within a fixed system. Specific conditions are also outlined, including timing, sequence, and environmental requirements. Certain actions must occur at defined intervals, while others depend on location or preparation stages. This is where the shift becomes clear. The repetition of these conditions suggests that the process was designed to be consistent and repeatable, rather than interpretive or flexible across contexts. Warnings are embedded directly within the instructions, describing outcomes if steps are not followed precisely. These are not general cautions. They are positioned alongside actions, reinforcing control and precision at every stage. The structure combines instruction, condition, and consequence into a single framework. The result is a system that reads as a manual of operation, rather than a symbolic or narrative text connected to Jerusalem traditions, the entities that should not exist. The same translated material connected to King Solomon includes detailed listings of entities, clarified through pattern alignment during 2023 analysis. These entries are not presented as abstract or symbolic figures. Each entity is identified by name, with defined characteristics and behavioral patterns. This matters because the level of detail shifts the text away from mythology and towards structured classification within a system. Each description follows a consistent format, outlining abilities, limitations, and responses under specific conditions. The entities are arranged into hierarchies, with ranks and roles assigned across the system. That distinction is important. The structure resembles organized classification systems, where each position carries defined function and authority, rather than narrative significance. The text also describes what these entities are capable of providing, including knowledge, influence, and material outcomes. However, these references are paired with detailed warnings about instability and loss of control. This is where the shift becomes clear. The material does not present these interactions as neutral or beneficial. It emphasizes risk, requiring strict adherence to defined processes to maintain control. The consistency across all entries reinforces the overall structure. Each entity follows the same pattern of identification, classification, and conditional interaction. This creates a unified system, where each component fits within a larger framework rather than existing independently. The result is a structured record that treats these entities as part of an organized system, documented with precision rather than described through symbolic narrative. The knowledge that breaks boundaries. The translated material attributed to King Solomon, analyzed through modern reconstruction in 2023, contains references that extend beyond the expected knowledge of the ancient world. Certain passages describe celestial movement, energy flow, and unseen forces using structured language rather than symbolic expression. This matters because these descriptions do not align with the scientific understanding available in Jerusalem during early historical periods, suggesting a source of knowledge that exceeds conventional limits. Some sections describe layered realities and unseen dimensions, presented not as philosophical ideas, but as structured environments with defined properties. The language used is precise, outlining relationships between visible and non-visible systems. That distinction is important. The text does not speculate. It defines using consistent terminology across multiple passages. This creates a framework that resembles modern discussions around dimensional theory, despite originating in a period long before such concepts were formally studied. Instructions within the text also describe methods for accessing information beyond standard perception. These are not framed as abstract practices. They are presented as processes with conditions, sequence, and expected outcomes. This is where the shift becomes clear. The material does not describe limits. It outlines ways to move beyond them, suggesting that the knowledge was intended to be applied rather than simply understood. The consistency of these references reinforces a larger implication. The text positions King Solomon not only as a ruler within ancient Israel, but as an individual connected to systems of knowledge that extend beyond his era. The combination of structured instruction, advanced description, and repeatable processes suggests that the material reflects a level of understanding that does not fit within the historical context of 970 BC, indicating access to a framework that was not widely available or recorded at the time. The fear that silenced generations. The texts associated with King Solomon were not simply ignored over time. They were actively restricted, particularly during periods of control in medieval Europe. By the 15th century, institutions had classified such writings as dangerous, placing them outside accepted doctrine. This matters because classification determines survival. Texts considered acceptable are preserved openly, while those deemed threatening are limited, altered, or removed from circulation. Possession of these materials carried consequences during certain historical periods. Records from regions including London and other European centers indicate that individuals associated with restricted texts often worked under secrecy. That distinction is important. The need for concealment suggests that the material was taken seriously, not dismissed as irrelevant or false. The response reflects perceived impact rather than lack of credibility. Over time, the structure of the texts changed as a result of this restriction. Sections were removed, rewritten, or divided into fragments, making full reconstruction difficult. This is where the shift becomes clear. The material was not lost through neglect. It was controlled through deliberate limitation. The fragmentation reduced accessibility while preserving selected portions within restricted environments. The long-term effect of this process is visible in how the texts are understood today. What remains is incomplete, shaped by centuries of selective preservation and restricted access. The association with King Solomon, combined with the structured nature of the content, continues to influence how the material is viewed. The pattern of suppression suggests that the concern was not whether the texts were valid, but how their content might be used if fully understood. Why? It's resurfacing now. The renewed attention around texts linked to King Solomon is closely tied to advances in decoding methods developed in 2023, particularly those involving AI-assisted analysis. These tools have allowed researchers in Jerusalem and other academic centers to identify patterns that were previously missed. This matters because earlier scholars working through the 20th century relied on manual interpretation, which limited their ability to connect fragmented sections into a complete structure. At the same time, access to historical material has expanded through digital archiving. Manuscripts once held in restricted collections across London and Europe are now being scanned and shared across research networks. That distinction is important. The barrier is no longer physical access, it is interpretation. The material is available, but understanding it requires methods that were not available in earlier periods. Public attention has also played a role in this shift. Figures such as Mel Gibson have drawn focus towards suppressed historical material, bringing broader visibility to texts that were previously confined to academic circles. This is where the shift becomes clear. What was once limited to specialists is now part of wider discussion, increasing both interest and scrutiny around the content. The combination of advanced decoding, wider access, and public attention has created a new phase in how these texts are approached. The focus has moved from preservation to interpretation, where the challenge is not finding the material, but understanding what it contains. This change reflects a transition from restricted knowledge to active analysis within the current 2023 research environment. What this discovery really means. The interpretation of texts linked to King Solomon, particularly through analysis completed in 2023, introduces a shift in how historical knowledge is understood. The material suggests the presence of structured systems that do not align fully with known frameworks from ancient Israel. This matters because it challenges the assumption that historical records represent the full extent of knowledge available during that period. The content also creates overlap between categories that are typically separated. References within the text connect elements of belief, structured process, and observational description. That distinction is important. It suggests that the boundaries between religion, science, and controlled knowledge may not have been defined in the same way during earlier periods in Jerusalem. This shift affects how historical completeness is viewed. The presence of structured material outside standard records indicates that existing understanding may be partial rather than complete. This is where the shift becomes clear. The focus moves from confirming known history to identifying what may have been excluded or restricted over time. The broader implication lies in how this material was handled across different periods, including the 15th century, where restriction and classification shaped its preservation. The text remains consistent in structure, but its accessibility has changed. The result is a body of knowledge that has re-emerged under new methods of interpretation, raising questions about how much of the historical record reflects what was known, and how much reflects what was allowed to remain visible. If the translation is accurate, then what was uncovered in 2023 isn't just history, it's structure. And if it was preserved this carefully, it may have never been meant to be fully understood.